Hi there, hope you're all okay, whoever's watching. Welcome back to the channel. If you like my content, please give a like to the video and subscribe if you can. Anyway, today this is a true story, and it breaks my heart, but it is a true story. It's a story from the UK about a good friend of mine. Anyway, I'll give you from the start. Some years ago, I moved into my house in the UK in Erdington, Birmingham, where I live. As you all know, it's well, some of you know, it's not a very nice place to live. There's lots of murders there and all sorts now. But when I moved there, it was a nice place. Anyway, when I first moved in, I moved into my house, and it needed a lot of work on it. As you know, a lot of people buy houses and they need work doing up on them. Anyway, I was at work in the week. I had a mortgage which was, it was only £15,000, which is about what, $20,000. This was in the 80s. Anyway, next door there was a grumpy old man, always grumpy, never ever smiled. And I used to work Monday till Friday, and Saturday and Sunday I had off. And at the weekend I used to do work on the house, and I used to work as late as I could. I lived with my girlfriend at the time, and this man next door, his name was Malcolm. He really was a grumpy old man. Anyway, I'd be working late and there'd be a knock on the door, 10 o'clock. Don't you think you've done enough? I've got to be up at 5 o'clock. Now, Malcolm, he owned a newsagent's on the main road, which was at the bottom of the road where I lived. It was a very, very busy newsagent's. And he was probably in his early 40s then. He was quite large, he was a very obese man, but you know, I thought, okay, to keep the peace, so I'd stop working and wait till Sunday, and round about 6 o'clock on a Sunday he'd knock on the door again and say, come on son, it's Sunday, you know, give it a rest. So I was like, okay, okay Malcolm, you know, I'll keep the peace. So I'd stop work on Sunday at round about 6 o'clock. Anyway, I'd go to work all the week. Anyway, this went on for months, and I started chatting to him every now and again on the doorstep, you know, and he'd say, well, what are you hoping to do? I said, oh, I want to do this and want to do that. Sure, you've got some money then, ain't you? I was a plumber, you know, I was an engineer, so I was earning not bad, not excellent, but not bad money either at that time. Anyway, like I said, he owned a big newsagents and sweet shop down on the main road, down the bottom of the road from us. I used to go in there occasionally and talk to him, get advice off him, because he was a good businessman, he really was. And I told him I was always having trouble with my books, with my VAT, the taxes, and he'd say, do them as you go along, don't be an idiot. I said, what do you mean? He said, well, every night when I shut the shop, he says, I spend an hour doing the books. He says, and then when it comes to the end of the month or the end of the quarter, or even the end of the year, when you go to do your taxes, it's already done. He says, and that way you can't forget, and then you don't get no tax investigation because it's already sorted. You've gone by the day. He says, all I do is open up my tools. They've got VAT checkers in the tools. He says, I'll just go by what's that and do that. Anyway, couple of years down the line, he says, I'm looking forward to retirement. He was in his 50s then. And I says, oh yeah, when are you going to retire, Malcolm? He says, I'm going to wait till I get my state pension at 65, because it was 65 then. I think it's about 67, 68 now. Anyway, I says to him, well, what are you going to do? He says, I'm going to buy myself a camper. I says, oh, that sounds nice. He says, yeah. He really enjoyed his fishing. I enjoy my fishing, I still do. And over the years, we got to become really good friends. He really was a great guy at the end, you know. But I used to talk to him, and he'd say, why don't you come fishing to my place? Now, the reason I say this is it's my place. He was very well off because he worked hard. I mean, he used to get up at 5 o'clock, be in work at 6, and he used to leave work at 7 o'clock on the night. His shop was open 7 days a week, and he did that for around about 40 years. Anyway, he says to me, why don't you bring your dad fishing? Come fishing, bring your dad with you, because my dad was really into his fishing as well. I says, oh, okay, then where is it? And he gave me a place on the map, and it was about 40 miles away from where we lived. I said, well, that looks nice. He says, oh, I bought it. I says, what do you mean you bought it? He says, I brought the whole fishing club. I said, oh, all right then. So me and my dad went up there, and we had a great time. We weren't fishing, and we caught plenty of fish. He took us down the pub for a meal afterwards. Like I says, he turned out to be a really good friend. So I says, Mark, is this where you're going to retire when is this where you're going to stop when you retire with your camper van? He said, oh, no. He says, this is just for occasions, you know. He'd put a fence around it. He'd got himself a bailiff to look after it and take the money for the fishermen, you know. It was quite a big pond, it really, really was. And it was well stocked. He loved his carp fishing. So he filled it with all sorts of carp, mirror carp, crucian carp, common carp, whatever carp he liked. Anyway, going through the years again, he got to around about 64 and he says, oh, he says, I'm just going out to look at some campers. I said, oh, where are you going? He says, I'm going to the motorhome caravan show. He says, come with us. He says, go on, I'll pay for you in. Anyway, we went to the motorhome and caravan show, and we looked at some wonderful campers. We really did. I mean, some of them was huge, like £100,000. And he says, no. He says, I don't want that big. He says, I just want one with enough room for me and my dog. He had a little dog. Anyway, I says, did you buy one? He says, no. He says, I've just come to have a look to see what's available in the pipeline. Okay. So anyway, it comes to around about a month before his retirement, and about a month before his retirement, the caravan and camping show was on again. I didn't go with him this time, but he come back, he knocked on the door, he says, look what I've bought. And he showed me this brochure, and it was a beautiful van. It was around about 20 foot long, brand spanking new, and he got a tow bar in it. And he says, I've bought myself a brand new mini car. I says, oh, well, how are you going to do that? He says, there's an attachment that fits on the back and you drag the car around everywhere you go. Oh, excellent. So, anyway, about a week before he retired, his camper van turns up, he's got his mini, he's hitched it all up and he's driving round, and he come back and he says, look at this, he says, it all works. I says, do you know, Malcolm, that is fantastic. I was so jealous of him, because he was doing, you know, what a lot of people dream of doing. Another thing I forgot to add, he wasn't married because he divorced his wife years ago, and he lost interest in women after that. He was just more interested in his fishing and his shop. But, you know, this is the way it is. This is the way things go with people. Anyway, about a week before he retired, he says, a week to go, son, a week to go. I says, oh yeah. I was really happy for him, I really was. He was a great guy. Anyway, come up to the day he retired. He says, the shop's gone, I've handed over the keys. It all belonged to him, the shop. He says, I've made a bit of money out of that. He says, over my life, and I never knew about this, he says, I've saved myself a load of Krugerrands. I says, I didn't know what Krugerrands was then. I says, what's Krugerrands, Mel? He says, it's all gold coins. He says, and what you do is you invest in them, and he says, gold always goes up, never goes down. I'd never heard of crypto then, so I couldn't argue with him and say, oh, I'd bought crypto. Anyway, I knew he had this Krugerrands in a safety deposit box, but he never ever told anybody where he kept the key or the paperwork to get in. I don't know much about safety deposit boxes. All I know is you pay monthly or yearly to keep your stuff in them. Anyway, he comes to the day of his retirement and he was so excited. He says, another week, son, and I'll be off. The house was sold. He'd got everything ready. He'd packed his camper van. He'd put everything he wanted out the house into his camper van. He'd hitched up his car, and he says, I'm off tonight, son. Okay, Malcolm, have a great life, mate. Keep in touch, you know, mobile phones are around then. I says, you keep in touch, mate, because it's been a pleasure to have you as the next door neighbour. Anyway, I get a knock on the door the next morning, and it was his son. He said, did you hear all the commotion last night? I said, no. I am a heavy sleeper. and my bedroom was at the front of the house. So he says, you didn't hear it? He says, the noise was horrendous. I says, what happened, mate? He said, the old man was getting ready in his van. He says, we all come round to see him off, and he started having these funny attacks. So we called out the ambulance, and the ambulance says, oh, he's having a heart attack. Anyway, they put him on the bed inside the ambulance, and they brought him back 4 times. And his son says to me, in the end, we just said, look, this is doing him more harm than good, and it can't be good for his brain. You know, he's probably going to be a cabbage. And in the end, we had to let him go, and I was absolutely devastated. I really was. He was a great guy, and you know, I still think about him even now, and it's been over 20 years since he died, but I still think about him even now. I think to myself, Malcolm, why didn't you just retire when you was 60? You could afford to. He was a millionaire. He really was a millionaire, and he could have afforded, but he loved to work. Now, what I want to say at the end of this is, let this be a lesson to all of us. Life's not all about money. Life's about living. So, as best as you can, get your money together and start living. It doesn't matter where you go, as long as you enjoy yourself, because you never know how many years or how many days you've got left. You could be walking across the road tomorrow and get killed by a car. You just never know. Anyway, folks, all I want to say is let that be a lesson to all of us. Have a great day and look after yourselves. Keep safe. Bye.